Welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining us on part one of our two-part higher education webinar series. Hopefully everyone's having a great day so far. My name is Brandon Harrison. I am one of the partners here at iBailey that specializes in higher education institutions. We put this webinar series together to address some key issues that are affecting higher education institutions as this pandemic has changed the way that we all conduct business. So we hope that you can attend part two as well of our two-part series, which is going to be on April 28th. That will address the risk of remote working that has changed with the COVID. So these two sessions are going to provide some helpful information that hopefully you can take back within your organization. But I do not want to take up too much of your time. Today we have a great presenter, Chris Williams, to discuss cybersecurity trends within higher education institutions. I will let Chris tell you more about himself. So Chris, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Brandon. Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Williams, and I'm going to share my screen here. So just for a little background for everybody, I am a former educator at both the high school level and the college level. I'm currently teaching active duty and veteran military cybersecurity for their 601 CompTIA Security Plus certification. I've worked in higher ed and education for the last 15 years as a trainer and an educator, as well as a para. And so educating has just always been a passion of mine. I have two parents that are both educators as well. And so it kind of goes hand in hand for me for cybersecurity and education. What our agenda today is we're just really going to try to focus on some of the myths that we're seeing in the education field or in the cybersecurity field, and focusing it on the education field as well, and the effects that we're seeing from a cybersecurity attack. And then also how to create that culture of cybersecurity within your organization, and what you need to do that. And as we're looking at it, we see this whole field of cybersecurity is just ever changing and evolving. And I'm assuming that because most of you are here today, that there's something that has piqued your interest or that has made you think, hey, I need to figure out what's going on with cybersecurity. The reality is it's always changing. They say if you aren't up to date with cybersecurity within 2 years, you're out of date. And so everything has changed so rapidly, even in the last 6 months, that it's hard to stay on top of it if you're not following it. And so if you don't have time to have somebody to pay attention to it constantly, the landscape is just always evolving. And so what do we need to do to understand cybersecurity, especially for people that aren't in my position and don't have time to do this day in and day out? And how do you understand what people are actually trying to get at when they're doing these cyber attacks? What are professional hackers? What are these cyber criminals looking for? What I like to say is they're after that data. They're looking for that key pieces of information. There's reasons why for years, when you go to like a grocery store, they're like, hey, will you sign up for this bonus card to get a discount? It wasn't so that they could help you get coupons. That wasn't what they were looking for. They're looking to collect data. The reality is that in order to help track you better, they have these systems in place to help create a profile on you. And so this is a kind of information that, while it may seem that it doesn't matter to you how much information you give up, cyber criminals are trying to find out a digital footprint of you and your organization and how much information they can gain all over the place. So what kind of information can they gather on you? What kind of information can they gather on your business? And what kind of information can they gather on your friends and family members just by looking out what we call open source intelligence? And so that's all of the digital footprint that you have out there already. And while we're looking at and focusing on just higher ed, these are just headlines from the last 6 months of cyber attacks and different ransomware attacks that have happened within higher ed. And so just around Christmas time, we had a cyber attack that happened in Albuquerque, where cyber criminals came through and they breached the system that makes sure where you can get in touch with the emergency contact list. And it also happened to deal with attendance and all of that sort of thing. And so what happened was the school district had to shut down for, it was over a week before they were able to go back to pen and paper setup and make sure that they had all of those emergency contacts in case something were to happen. And so we're seeing across the board through education that there's all kinds of these different attacks. And when we're talking to the education field in general, one of the things that make higher ed and larger target is they have what's called a different version of an insider threat. And so most organizations, when you're thinking like healthcare or you're an accounting firm, when you're looking at insider threats, you're just thinking of the employees. Well, education have all these students that are these trusted individuals that are now on campus, on the property every day, just as much as any employee, that have been given these elevated access. So they have the ability to launch these attacks on the premise that you might not have in other industries. So that makes them a lot larger attack surface. The other thing that we're seeing with education is that education in general has a lot of what's called personal identifiable information, so PII. And so what we're seeing is that it's a really hotbed for cyber attacks. And so when we look at who are the two most targeted industries for cyber attacks, is the healthcare industry and the education industry. And so because of that, we're seeing a large trend in the amount of cyber attacks that are really focused on the education industry, because they have all of this amount of data that these cyber criminals are really after. And what to exacerbate that is the fact that most school districts and most educational facilities are struggling to maintain a strong cybersecurity awareness and IT infrastructure to keep these cyber criminals out. And so you have these elevated access within students, and you have the ability for them to come in and breach these networks and to remain unseen. And so what they want to do is they don't necessarily want to be caught. And so when you're seeing at this stat that says it takes 286 days to identify a breach, that means that somebody's coming into the network and they're just sitting there and they're collecting data. The reality is that a cyber criminal wants to get onto that network and they want to sit there as long as possible and just collect data. And they want to get out without getting caught. It's those ransomwares where they have that big red screen. It says, hey, we have all your files encrypted and you need to pay us in Bitcoin, or you need to pay us in some cryptocurrency to get all your information back. That's when they're ready to show their hand. But they're going to sit there and they're going to collect as much information as possible and lock down all your systems, lock down all your backups before they even show that they're there. And so it's 286 days on average before they're even found. And then they're saying it's about 80 days before you can recover from that. And then the cost of recovering it is just huge. It's about $4 million to recover from an average breach. And so what we're seeing as far as the trends in cybersecurity is we're seeing a lot of different issues where we're trying to find talent and the talent shortage. And so because cyber criminals are growing in their sophistication so quickly, and they're changing the way that they're attacking you. We used to say that joke of like, you got this email from the Nigerian prince that says, if I send you $500, I'll give you my fortune. Well, the emails aren't coming across that easy, where you're just like, oh, well, that's a fake email. I can spot that. I'm not going to send you $500. The reality is that there's so many different ways that these cyber criminals are attacking you that it's becoming harder and harder for you to recognize when these attacks are happening. And cyber criminals are finding ways to get onto your network. They're utilizing your personal emails, and they're finding out your HR structure so that it will look like, hey, I know that Mike works in IT and this is your domain. I'm going to craft an email that looks like it's coming from your domain. So if it's coming from a .edu, say I work at anycompany.edu and I have a mic, I'm going to attach it to that thread even that we have an email going on, and I'm going to attach a file. So when you open it, then it launches that payload that gives me control of your system. And so we're seeing all of this on top of the fact that a lot of organizations are adding things to make their lives easier, making different people's lives easier, like smart thermostats or printers that have Wi-Fi printing, things like that, that just add a lot of different areas that can be attacked. And so if you think about it as when you go to your house, how many different Internet of Things devices have you added to your house? Do you have a Ring doorbell? Do you have smart lights? Do you have things like that that connect to the internet? Well, all of those things have to be patched regularly or have to have security updates to make sure that there's not an easy way for a cyber criminal to come in. And if that's not happening, there's vulnerabilities that different cyber criminals can come in and get onto your network. And so some of the myths that we're looking at is that there's a lot of different things that are going around, just like in any industry, where you see people thinking, oh, well, I don't need to worry about it because of this. And so people are like, oh, well, I don't have to worry about it because I don't have that much to lose. I'm not a big fish. They're not going to come after me because I'm not worth this much money. The reality is that most of the time, cyber criminals are going to go after the smaller fish because it is easier, for one, if they can ransomware somebody for $50,000 versus $2 million. They're not going to have the news media coverage. They're when they go to the FBI or they go to the cops are just going to be like, well, you're kind of out of luck. There's not going to be this barrage of investigation as it is if they had a large ransomware attack. And the other thing that we're seeing is like, well, it's not really my responsibility. We have an IT staff that does that. When they were looking at the statistics of a breach, it was shown that 92% of all breaches occur because somebody clicked on a file or somebody opened something that they shouldn't have. And that's the end user. That's not an IT staff. And so even the organizations that have the proper malware filtering on their emails and things like that, there's only so much they can do before it gets to the end user, the person that has to open those emails. So if they're not trained properly, it's not going to be able to be protected. And so the reality is that the cybersecurity is going to have to be done on every level. And so you have to be able to look at it as it's everybody's responsibility, not just IT's responsibility. And so now we got to look at what are the effects of the cyber attack? How is this going to affect our organization? How is it going to affect me personally? If our school is attacked by a cyber attack, how's the enrollment going to look? How are students going to look at us? How are parents going to look at us? What's it going to look like for job satisfaction if my social security number gets leaked or things like that? What's the reputation going to be? How is everything going to affect that? If we have to pay out $4 million, what is that going to look like as far as, performance-based increases over the time? Here we're looking at what's called the MITRE ATT&CK framework. So what I do for my job as well is I'm actually what's called an ethical hacker. So I'm a penetration tester as well as an educator. And so what I go through and I do is I go on networks and I try to hack into networks to find out what type of vulnerabilities there are. And so I'll go onto a network and see if I can get control or find files that have information that there shouldn't be. And so what the MITRE ATT&CK framework is it's kind of like your course curriculum, or it's your if you have a substitute teacher and you need to show what your course plan is for the day. This is what we would lay out for showing what our step-by-step would be. And so if we're looking at the MITRE ATT&CK framework, it's not going to be a hard and fast, we have to do every step on the MITRE ATT&CK framework, but it's going to be kind of a guideline or a playbook of these are the steps that we're going to take when we go on a network to see how much information we can get when we're doing a penetration test. And it's going to help simulate what the bad guys are doing to get all of your information and how much information they can gather by doing the different things that they're doing, because they're using a lot of the same tools, if not the exact same tools that I'm using as an ethical hacker. And so the difference is that I'm not doing it to try to steal your information and post it on the dark web or sell it. I'm doing it to give back to your IT staff to say, hey, these are the things that we got. You need to help secure this information better. And these are the gaps that you have. And so when we're looking at it, we go through a reconnaissance phase where we're going through and we're seeing how much information we can find online about you, or how much we can find in your Facebook account or your LinkedIn profile or your Instagram or your Twitter. We find a lot of information that's just readily available. And so you would be surprised by, if you just Google yourself, if you don't have a common name, how easy it is to find, your date of birth, your phone number, how much you bought your house for. With all of that kind of information, how much more information do I actually need to gather before I can do a identity theft on you? So if I get on your Facebook account, how much information can I gather from there? Can I find out where you got married? Can I find out, if I don't already have your date of birth, how many people wished you a happy birthday? Where did you graduate from high school? Things like that. If I'm trying to do a network reconnaissance and find out what kind of information you have on your systems at your schools, how much of that information are you giving out on your job postings? Do I need to know what kind of software you're running or hardware systems you have? Those are the kind of things we're doing on the reconnaissance phase. And then when we're going through the exploitation phase, we're going to find out, well, we have all this information now. What kind of vulnerabilities exist now? So if I already know that you're running a system, say you're running a Linux machine and Linux has been shown to have a vulnerability, I know I'm going to go and try those first. So I know that there's a weakness here. I'm going to go and attack that weakness first. So it's going to save me time, because the reality is that my time is going to be worth something. And if I can get in the easiest way possible, that's what I'm going to do. And then once I'm in, like I talked about before, I'm going to try to stay there as long as possible. That's the persistence phase. I'm going to gain as much information, because information is going to be passed along that network all the time. And if people don't realize that I'm there, I'm just going to keep finding different ways to make sure that I can stay in there, and find ways that if I get kicked out, I can get back in. So I'm going to dig my way in there, and I'm going to figure out ways to get to other parts of that network. If you're taking computers home, I'm going to figure out if I can go home with you, things like that. And the reality is, I'm going to try to see how much of that information I can gather and gain, and then encrypt and keep, and then sell. I'm going to make as much money on it as possible. And so here is our first polling question. So let's take a look at that, and we're going to send out that polling question. So I'll give you guys about 30 seconds here to take a look at those, please. Awesome. So I am seeing the results here, and it looks like most of you guys have the roles documented, and that is great. One of the things that we talk about is that if it's not written down and it's not documented, it doesn't happen. And so what we're finding is that when we're doing these cybersecurity risk assessments, is that a lot of people say, yeah, I have that, but I don't have it written down anywhere. And so when we're going through the documents, it just needs to be really clear that somebody picks it up, they're able to go through it as if they hadn't seen it before. So every person in your organization needs to be able to look at it and understand that document. And so when we're looking at the impacts of the breach, we talked about this a little bit before. So when somebody comes through and takes that data, how is that going to affect your organization? What are we going to look at? What are they stealing from you that is going to have those long-term effects? So I'm sure many or some of you were impacted by that Kronos ransomware attack that happened back in December, where that HR attack happened, and they are still shut down, I believe, where they can't do payroll, they can't do PTO, they can't do all of that sort of thing. And so they're having to deal with that breach where people are having to fill out time cards manually and things like that. And so what is the impact for that organization? They have this loss of information, and now they have a loss of security, and they have a loss of confidence for their clients. And so if that were to happen to you as a institution, what would that look like for you? What would your customer base look like? What would your students think? Would it matter to you? Would it matter to you as an employee? How does that all play into your decision making on your cybersecurity assessments, and what you're looking at? And so part of the thing that we talk about is, if you don't plan, if you don't take the time to plan, you're going to end up being attacked. And so when criminals are looking for is, they're looking for those organizations that aren't prepared. And so the reality is they have so much, there's so many people out there that can be attacked. It's just like going around in a neighborhood and trying to find an unlocked door. And so you go through a parking garage, you can see videos on it on YouTube where criminals will just go around and they'll check if doors unlocked. And that's kind of what we're looking at with different organizations is as soon as you put a IP, your computer address online, they're getting hit. And so if you have a publicly facing IP address with a domain, they're going on and they're seeing, hey, can I get down here? What are the open availability for me to go on? What are the vulnerabilities based on what I'm seeing? How can I attack this? And so being able to be prepared and having those incident response teams available, say when that happened in the worst case scenarios, what are you prepared for? Do you have that cybersecurity insurance? Have you vetted out all the different scenarios that might happen in the case of the worst case scenario? Because if you're not ready for it, when it happens, or if it were to happen, you're just going to run around like a chicken with its head cut off, because it's just kind of like, oh my gosh, the sky is falling. And so now we need to start talking about, what can I do personally? How can I help with cybersecurity for our organization? And so when we're looking at phishing emails, what I talked about before was they've become so much more complex than what they used to be. And so there's a few things that we look at when we're talking about a phishing email that will help us identify whether or not it's fraudulent. And so some of these are a little bit easier to spot than others. So it's like, oh, well, all of a sudden I'm getting an email from somebody I've never gotten an email before saying that they have an offer for me, or it has an attachment and I didn't ask for anything. The FBI warns that if you haven't asked for something, don't open it. And that's whether it be a package that was delivered to you from an Amazon delivery, or an email attachment, or a text message. You shouldn't open those attachments unless you've asked for it. And if somebody sends you something and you know the person, you should probably still follow up before you open it, because there's a chance that maybe they got attacked and their account has been compromised, and that what's been sent to you isn't legitimate. So you need to make sure that you know what's coming to you before you open those things. And so here's a phishing email, and I have another polling question coming up here. And while we're looking at it, what I want you to do is look at this email here and see how many different issues you can find with this phishing email. So I'm going to hold this up here and I'm going to pull up the next slide. And here's our polling question. So we had 4 different things that you should look at here. And it's one of those things where there's so many things that you can look at on an email that they're really close. And so if you get something here, you got a domain that's really close, right? And so oftentimes people will go and they'll buy domain names that look like it's the right one. So DHL has been one of the most popular email addresses that have been stolen recently, because they're sending you out these emails that say, hey, we missed you on a package. Here's a link to track your package. UPS does it, or people have been stealing ones saying it's UPS or FedEx. It's a real common one these days. It's also, if you hover over that hyperlink, it's going to send you somewhere other than where you want to go. And so that's something to look at as well. And so you also want to see, hey, it's not really sent to me. It's just a dear user. You want to make sure that it's all of those different things. And so you can figure out how to do that. One of the things that we're also looking at a lot lately are different phishing calls. And so I'm sure a lot of you, just like myself, have been getting those, hey, this is from the dealer servicing agent saying your car warranty has expired, or things like that. Those are probably the easier ones to figure out, hey, I'm just going to hang up on that person. But we're getting a lot more, especially within businesses that are really targeted towards people. And so they have it figured out saying, I'm going to call you saying your Amazon account has been hacked, or that you made a fraudulent purchase, or things like that. And so we're calling and we're verifying a purchase, or we're saying, hey, we know your information. So because there's so much information out there already, we're just verifying it. And if you give more information, they're just trying to build that portfolio of you, that profile of you a little bit better. So they might not actually be looking for something that you think is sensitive information, as much as they're working together with other people or maybe just themselves to figure out how much of your portfolio they can build. So if they just need little bits of information from you to help attack something else, that's all they need to get more information to then do that fraudulent charge on your account. And so what we were talking about before was how much of that PII are you actually giving out online? How much data, how much is your digital footprint? How big is your network out there? And how much are your friends giving? How much are your friends and family sharing about you? How often are you tagged in somebody's Facebook post? Or when you're out there, are you linked to other people's accounts that are just wide open for people to see? Are people able to go on and find out your credit card information by linking so many different things that they're able to lock you out of your accounts? And so here are a couple of instances where people just overshare. I don't know if any of you followed, but Antonio Brown on that left side there shared his banking and routing account information when he was cut not too long ago. And so if I didn't have that slide over there, you would actually see his actual account information, and that stuff you should never share. On your LinkedIn profile, does it share your last 3 jobs? So when you're doing those security questions that a lot of companies do, and they're like, hey, can you verify your password? It's like, well, give me my hints. How many of your hints can be answered because of your postings online that we can find out by looking through and creating this document saying, well, I know about John Smith, and this is where he got married. This is what he likes. This is his favorite sports team. This is what he went, where he goes to eat. This is who he married. This is his last girlfriend. All of this information is going to be on his profiles. How much of that can I gain, and what can I do to leverage that? And then when we're talking again about smishing, that's that text messaging. So a lot of bad guys have been going through and they're sending these text messages because the reality is mobile phones don't have a lot of security protocols in place to block this. And so they're coming up with more and more ways, but they're playing catch up to keep these attacks from happening. And so this one is actually from my phone on the left, where AT&T was sent. It was AT&T sent me this text saying, "Hey, you paid your bill. Click this link and we'll give you a gift." Obviously, it wasn't AT&T, and if I clicked on that link, that probably would have installed some kind of malware onto my device. But the devices now, for those of you that are similar to me, these devices are more powerful than anything I used when I was in college. So my computer that I used when I was in college didn't have as much RAM or processing power as my smartphone does. And so if that were to be infected, they would have access to a lot of my personal data, a lot of information about different people that I contact, and all of that information. So that's what they're after by sending these smishing email or smishing texts. And so you need to be really conscious about the information that you're giving and the applications that you're downloading, because there's a lot of applications that you can download as well that can do that sort of attack on your systems. And so when we start talking about our passwords, we also need to understand that there's a certain security within the length of our password. And so when they talk about how quickly a password can be cracked, there's all kinds of computer programs that we can plug in your password and then find out your password almost immediately. So if you have an 8-character password that's only letters and numbers, it's going to be 5 seconds. And so depending on the processing power of the computer, it speeds it up even more. And so there's a lot of new graphics cards that have come out in the industry lately. And so we can utilize those with the computational power to help leverage that to crack your password. And so if you look at the chart, you can see how often or how easily those passwords are stolen. And so if you're reusing a password, though, that changes the algorithm as well. So we can dump in passwords that we have known to have been stolen. So there's a website called haveibeenpawned.com where you can go through and you can see your personal email and see if it's been stolen in a database that's called Pawned. And so what we see is all of these different emails that have been stolen, and you can go on to different hacker websites and they have dumps of databases with password lists. And so you just put that into another computer program and you put that on with the system, and then it'll crack passwords with known password um, settings. And so that's one of those things where they say, don't reuse a password. Don't use it multiple places because it might be stolen. And if you know that the password's stolen, don't ever use it again, because we're going to throw that into a computer system and it's just going to run it. It's going to run it in the background. We don't have to sit there and manage it. We can just sit there and go after it. And so that's where this comes from. If you don't want to use anything personal to you, you don't want to use your dog's name, you don't want to use your wife's name, you don't want to use your kid's name, you don't want to use where you've been married. All of these different things are really important for you to understand that anything that we can find out about you, we're going to use as a password to try to hack into your account. And so when we're looking at our safe internet habits, we want to make sure that we're looking at HTTPS sites and not HTTP. And so typically anymore, when you're using a web browser like Chrome or Edge or Firefox, it's going to pop up with that not secure, or it's going to tell you, hey, do you really want to proceed to this site? And 99% of the time, you're not going to want to proceed to an insecure site. You're definitely never going to want to do credit card information or passwords, any kind of personal identifiable information onto a site that's not secure, because that kind of information can be seen by anybody that happens to be sitting on that website. So what happens is they can have a program installed that can see all of that traffic being sent over that network. And so what we need to do to prepare a culture of cybersecurity for our organization is try to help people understand all of the different things that we can do as a whole. And so we know what we can do personally, but how do we help enforce that or help encourage that to all of the people that we're around, whether that be our friends and family or our coworkers, to help really understand that it's an all-encompassing thing. It's not just IT's job, it's not just my job, but it's everybody's job to help keep our data secure. And so one of the things that we recommend is that you align with a framework. And so it's one of those things where if you're just saying, hey, I'm aligning with what I think is best, you're probably going to miss something. And it's helping you understand a standard. And so there's several different security standards that are out there. And so at Eide Bailly, we utilize NIST and ISO and CIS, but there's also SOC, and there's other industry standards that you can comply with. So if you're dealing with credit card information, there's PCI compliance and things like that. But to align with a framework just kind of helps you get to that baseline to understand where our shortcomings are and what we can do to help become better as a security program. And then once we figure that out, it has to be really bought in from the top down. And so if you have these security programs in place and it's only being established by the IT department, and IT is saying, hey, well, we've made it so that everybody has to do this on their devices, but nobody else is supporting us, then it's not going to be carried out through the whole organization because they don't have that support from everybody. And so you need to make sure that everybody is bought into this security program. And then it also has to be reviewed because, like I said at the beginning, if you're not up to date on cybersecurity, within 2 years, you're out of date because everything's changing so fast and everybody's figuring out different ways to attack you. Much like your students are changing all the time. The different things that they've done to get away with what they want to get away with has changed over the last 10 years than it has over the last 20 years. Now, some of their end goals are going to be the same, but you need to be able to change with the way that the attacks are. And so it also has to be able to be understood easily. And so it can't be so technical that when somebody picks up the document, they can't figure out, hey, I don't understand what I need to do. So if you get an attack at 2 a.m. and the person that's in charge of IT happens to be on vacation or on their honeymoon or unavailable for any reason, the next person can pick it up and say, well, I know exactly what to do because it's all laid out here. I know who to call. I know what servers I need to shut down. I know the steps I need to take to make sure that our data is secure. And so we just need to make sure that we have all of that laid out and documented as clearly as possible. And so one of the things that we're looking at, and so the FTC just released a a standard that has to be put in place by December 9th of 2022, that unless you have continuous monitoring and you're dealing with PII of consumer data, so you have social security number, bank accounts, things like that, you have to either have continuous monitoring or you have to have third-party audits and assessments with a penetration test done annually. And so if that applies to you in any way, which I'm assuming almost everybody that does, you have to have that, take that into account. And so you need to understand that you have to have either that means that you have to have a system that's paying attention to your cybersecurity needs, or you have to have somebody coming in to look at how your systems are managing that PII and making sure that you're addressing your vulnerabilities and being within compliance on that. And so one of the things that we're seeing, especially within the education field, is that lack of strong access control. And how do we manage that strong access control? Because you have so many users and they're cycling in and out all the time. And so you have incoming students, you have outgoing students. Are those outgoing students' accounts deactivated properly on time? I know when I graduated from my university, we joked around that I could print until, for like 15 years because my account was still active, and they had a print limit, but I could still go into the data center and I could print. Now, obviously it wasn't going to be super harmful for me to go print a file or two because I wasn't malicious, but the fact is that my account still wasn't closed out. How are we handling student account access? Are different devices controlled? Now that we have a lot of work from home or remote work, are we managing the different accounts that are being sent home? Are people able to just add stuff to the network? Do we know all of the systems that are online at all time? Can you make sure that that sort of thing is taken care of? How about software? Do you know all of the software that's being installed under your systems and things like that? How do you make sure that you manage that? And are the complex passwords on the system secure? Are you making sure that none of your passwords that the staff, faculty, and students are using have been compromised? And if they have, are you enforcing a password change policy? And then we're looking at our data security because, once again, we talked about it. Our data is what everybody's after. It's the most important thing. I talked to somebody years ago about Amazon. When Amazon first happened, they weren't in the business of actually making money. They were in the business of collecting data. And so that's what they were really after, is how can they collect as much data about you as possible? Because eventually they were going to make money off of that data. They have thousands and thousands of data centers with just information about you and the person you live with and the person that they're friends with, so that they can utilize you to help sell something to the person that you're friends with. And so they can target you to help you sell them. And so that data is really important. How are you securing all that information? Are you making sure that it's secure when you're storing it? Is it being secured as it's being sent across the network? Is it also being secured when it's on different devices? So if you're allowing somebody to access it on an iPad, is that iPad secure? Or is it completely available to anybody that happens to pick it up? And then one of the things that we need to make sure, and you guys are doing a great job of this, just being in the training here, is that training is continuous. As educators, you know that education has to always happen. It's a lifelong process. One of the things that people used to always say is that the human element is the weakest link, and that's not true. They're the greatest strength to cybersecurity. You guys have the ability to help shape the cybersecurity programs and the policies within your organizations, and to help bring up that cybersecurity program and to help make it the strongest it can be. The areas that we're going to be targeted are the weaker areas, and so you want to make sure that you're stronger than the person next door, but you also want to help bring up the person next door. So helping make sure that the people that you're around are trained and understand the risks of the cybersecurity weak shortcomings. And you need to make sure that there's no shame in the fact that, hey, I failed here, because the cyber criminals, they don't have a batting average, they don't have a slugging percentage, they don't have a win fail record. They're just going to keep attacking. There's no win loss record for them. If they have one person fail, that's a win, or one person fail on them, that's a win for them. If they have a 99% success rate where the people don't click on the link, but one person does, that's a win for them. So there's no shame in it. There's the percentages are way against the average user to not win. So we need to get rid of that idea that, hey, you screwed up, you messed up, you are the failure here. That's not the right attitude. We just need to help bring up everybody. And so now we look at our technical controls. What are we doing on our own facilities to make sure that we are up to date? Are we using different things to make sure that our access control are managed, that we know all the different devices that are in place? Are we monitoring our third-party applications? So what we hear an awful lot is, oh, well, AWS manages that, or we have Google taking care of that, or we have our EDS takes care of that. We have our third-party vendors manage our cybersecurity. Are you monitoring what they're doing? Are you looking over your security agreements on that? Can you actually go through and audit what they've said they're doing to make sure that they're meeting all of their protocols that they've said that they're hitting? And so making sure that we have accountability on those sort of things. And then through your antivirus, are you testing it? Are you making sure that everything is where it should be? And if you don't have that in place, do you understand where to go to get those sort of things and how to hit those marks? And then also we want to make sure that we're doing our routine backups. And so what we're looking at is not only do we have those backups, but then we can restore from the backups. So we're shutting down our systems and we're making sure that people, not only the head of our IT department, but the people below them understand how to go and restore from those backups, and that that somebody's not sitting in there that has encrypted our backups. And so when we look at our incident response, that doesn't necessarily have to be an in-house. There's different things and organizations that can do incident response. And but we need to make sure that we have an incident response plan in place, that we know that in the worst case scenario, when our data, we get that red pop-up screen that says, hey, pay me in Bitcoin, pay me in cryptocurrency, all of your information has been stolen, you're not getting it back. What are we going to do? Who do we contact? Do we have that information list? Have we gone through the different scenarios? Have we sat down with the different people that are keyed on that? Do they know what they need to do? Are we making sure, are we stepping through that process with them, that, you get that call at 3 o'clock in the morning, it's like, hey, we can't access payroll, we can't access student files, we can't access our testing information. All of that information is offline. We need to contact the FBI. What else do we need to do? Do they know what the next steps are? How do we go through all of that? Do we also have cyber insurance if we're going to be shut down for a certain amount of time? Do we know the process on how to get that, how to renew that? Who all do we need to communicate with? Do we call parents right away? Do we cancel school? How does that work? And then we just go back to creating that culture of cybersecurity. Like I talked about before, it has to be a top-down culture, and it has to be an all-encompassing. Everybody has to play a part in this. It can't just be, the executive leadership saying, hey, we're going to be doing cybersecurity, or IT saying we're going to be doing cybersecurity. There has to be a buy-in. If somebody on the maintenance staff says, I'm not going to do cybersecurity, but all of their systems have Internet of Things, so their thermostats are connected and they're not updating the software on it, and that leaves an attack surface that's vulnerable. Now I can go in and get on that smart thermostat, or I can get into a building control that allows me onto the network, or a security camera. Say somebody on the security team decides that I don't want to update my cameras because it's going to take it down for a certain amount of time, and I need to have 24-hour coverage on that. Are they buying in on the system? They need to make sure that they understand that we need to have built-in policies in place to create that culture where everybody's an integral part of that cybersecurity culture and that framework that we're looking for. And so when we're looking at our cybersecurity structure, we also need to understand that it has to start somewhere. And looking at the different polling questions, a lot of you have already stated that you have a lot of different things in place, but we need to be able to move up to different stages of that cybersecurity framework. And so whether that be NIST or it be CIS, there's different standards, and there's different groups that you can fall into based on where your cybersecurity maturity is. And so we look at how do you move up to different stages and different success levels. And there's nothing wrong with being in each stage. You just got to keep moving and continue to progress. You just want to continue to be able to have that measurable level of success, just like you would in any level of education, right? You want to be able to move that needle so that you're showing growth. And so it gives you a baseline, and then you can move up and just continue to work on things that you need to, that you know that you're missing. And so this helps you create that idea of, hey, these are my shortcomings. This is what I have planned to work at. And then it also helps you understand, well, this is what I need to budget for. Because unfortunately, a lot of people haven't figured out that cybersecurity needs to be something that I'm budgeting for as well. And so when we're looking at what we need to understand that from this training today is that the effects of a cybersecurity attack is going to be so much more than just the immediate after effects of somebody coming in and taking your information. It's going to create this disinterest in your organization. It's going to create a lack of trust, and it's going to take a long time to recover from. Then you also need to understand that from that, you have to create that culture of cybersecurity. And so you have to have it all encompassing. It has to be, everybody has to buy in. It can't just be directed from one person or one part of the organization. Everybody needs to be a part of that. And then on top of that, you have to figure out where you're going to, what standard you're going to be a part of so that you know how to measure it. And then you can help build that program out from there. So at this time, I am available for any questions. Well, if you decide that you have any questions or feel like you would like to contact me, this is my information on the right, and then the Director of Cybersecurity Services is on the left. So feel free to take that information down, and then feel free to contact us. So how do you limit controls as appropriate? So the MFA implementation, is that the question? Yes. So MFA implementation, I think, will just kind of vary depending upon vendor, but the recommendation is to try to get MFA implemented as many applications as possible. And if it's required depending on the procedure, on the policy, disabling the different applications that don't allow MFA. You also need to make sure that you have ways to monitor the different software systems that are installed so that you can, there's no workaround, right? And so if there's a way to get around it, people are going to get around it because, you know, when you have that MFA, people don't want to have to pull out their phone and verify, oh yeah, that's me as well. And so making sure that you have that software monitoring system installed.